Friends. Sometimes a diorama can come to life in the weirdest way. This one, for example, started when AK sent me their kit of the Land Rover. So when I was looking for inspiration, I found some photos of old garages on a stock image site. And later when I posted them on Patreon, one of my members messaged me like, dude, I know where that is. So he sent me the address, and you can actually find it on Google Maps. All you need to do is to just type in old fuel pumps. And the place is in Wales, in a small town of Lanrock. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it's on the main road, A4086 Plasterion Ter. Again, not sure. And you can just scout the real place on Google Street View with all the details, view it from all the angles and everything. Now, obviously, I'm not at the real spot. This is the best I could find in my area. But if already one person knows where that place is, I'm sure there will be more of you. So if by any chance you are from Wales or from the town or the area and you know that spot, please let me know in the comments, because it would be absolutely bonkers if we started this sort of scavenger hunt for the real place. And the simple fact that this diorama is inspired by a real place that we can actually visit and it looks the same way, it makes it very special for me. So, you know what? Let's check it out. I spent an hour or two creating the initial composition with random blocks of foam, trying to figure out the best way to present the entire scene. Every element is made from styrofoam, cut to shape on a hot wire cutter, except the large wall, which is a section of 1 cm thick foam board, cut with a knife. The landy will be parked in the corner, and there will be also a figure on the opposite side. Even though I was totally pumped for the large wall with crumbling stucco and exposed bricks, I decided to start with the metal shack. It's a good practice to begin your work by transferring all the openings from the sketch onto the foam, cutting them out, and ripping out the unwanted material. I've done a fair amount of corrugated metal in the last 2 years, and my process has barely changed. The only difference is that I started using copper foil because it's more durable than pewter, and it's also lighter. Anyway, some types of foam react poorly with superglue, so I prefer using PVA even when gluing plastic or metal. I try to follow the layout from the real shack and keep the gaps between each panel as small as possible. I wanted the windows to be removable for painting, and thus I needed them to perfectly fall in place without any effort. A simple guide made from cardboard is gonna help me with that. All the wooden elements are gonna be made from plastic. It's much easier to paint realistically than actual real wood, and texturing is a quick job if you use a metal wire brush. I like to texture a large section and then cut off the individual planks, making sure to use lots of soft incisions so the plank doesn't get deformed sideways. Building up the window frames in this manner is not the most scientific approach in the world, but it guarantees that the window will fit perfectly into the opening, even if the hole isn't perfect. Making doors is much simpler and definitely more fun, because you're working with a single sheet of plastic and you're just creating the illusion of individual planks with a scriber. This is where we can add more character by creating splintered ends of each plank, creating lots of contrast and texture. It's actually a good idea to clean up the scored surface because the wire brush leaves a lot of fuss and dust in its wake. Mr. Cement S works like a dream. However, it's the small details that truly make a difference, such as these 3D printed door handles from armor models, or these hinges which I quickly bent from copper foil. Working with superglue might seem like a messy job at first, but a superglue remover or debonder gets rid of all the mess in no time. As a finishing touch, I added the nail holes with a 0.4mm drill bit. I didn't add the actual nails this time, because my patience was required somewhere else. You see, the entire shack is bolted together, and each bolt has a washer underneath. That means we need to make 2 parts for each one of those. The washers are simply punched from a thin styrene sheet with the RP Tools punch and die set, and the actual bolts or nuts are punched with the opposite end of a drill bit from pewter foil. They look more like rivets, but at this scale, they're gonna look good enough once everything is painted. Okay, with a few more details in place, the shack is pretty much ready. I'll add the glass in each window later once the frames are painted, so let's put this cozy cabin aside for now and focus on the garage. As mentioned, the large wall is made from foam board, a type of artistic canvas that is also used for lightweight yet sturdy advertising signs. It's covered with paper from both sides, but it has a nice polyurethane core inside. The paper didn't go off easily from this particular one, and it caused some damage, but we'll manage that. Making the bricks was my standard routine, carving the horizontal lines and then adding the individual bricks using a simple paper template for proper 8mm spacing. A sharpened pencil is the absolute best tool for the smooth, rounded edges. Foam board is also a bit softer and more flexible than styrofoam, so the entire process is very fun. It's become my standard process to seal and fill the porous surface of any foam, and this one is no different. The acrylic paint straight from the jar is very thick, but it will penetrate deep into the foam texture. As such, you might need at least 2 layers to achieve a nice, smooth finish. As a side effect, the foam will also become immune to enamel thinners. But this was all just a quick work because our main focus here is the decomposing stucco, which I'm gonna recreate with acrylic wood putty. If I managed to peel the paper smoothly without causing any damage, the process would have been much quicker, but because of this, I had to apply the putty in several layers, sanding each one after it dried. However, this really seems like the best method for the job because putty behaves exactly like the real thing once it's dry. We can take this fact to our advantage once we start creating all the cracks and crumbling edges. Just check out how it flies off in a realistic way, and because the foam bricks underneath are already sealed with paint, the putty doesn't have a strong foothold. The real building also has some decorated ledges, and these will be made from thin cardboard. Kit boxes from our models are a great source of this material, and I started putting the box arts aside for this very purpose. Of course, everything needs to be properly textured, filled, and integrated into the surface with acrylic putty. Another advantage of this filler is that it dries extremely fast, so the entire workflow is very fluent. Adding the cracks can be done with a sharp object such as an old airbrush needle. This, however, is a technique that's completely in our hands, and we can't rely on the properties of the material to do the job for us. Something where I need a lot more practice. But yeah, that's our finished wall, and this component itself ties this diorama closely with my facades. I had to figure out how to assemble these individual components together, and I ended up with this base made from cork, which is gonna hold the 2 buildings in place. You see, the backside had to be laminated with oak veneer, and for that, I needed both buildings lined up perfectly. I left a good amount of veneer protruding so I could shave it precisely, but first I need to finish the roof. Google Street View shows that the garage has slate tiles, and once again, cardboard is gonna be ideal for that. It's easy to cut, yet durable and holds its shape, so it was easy to line up the tiles with the angled backside created by the veneer. Once the glue was dry, I marked out the end of each tile with a razor saw and carefully sliced off the excess veneer, creating a seamless transition between the building and the backside. I did the same procedure on all surfaces. And, of course, filling and sanding were done along with the final texturing job using acrylic putty. Even these tedious jobs can be made much easier once you're familiar with the techniques and the materials you're using. Getting back to my morning wood ritual, I fabricated the large barn door from a single sheet of 0.5mm plastic using the same methods as shown before. I think it's essential to try and squeeze in as many interesting textures and details as possible into these large structures, because then they'll be much more fun to paint. And, of course, they're gonna look absolutely bonkers on the finished miniature. I again took most of the inspiration from the real building, but I spiced it up with a few more planks. So here we have the finished wall, and if I wanted to end my whole career, I just take this piece and put it in a picture frame. But here it is as a part of the structure, and before we move on to the groundwork, I'll spice it up with one of these 3D printed palettes from Armor Models, who snuck up on me at a model show and shoved these in my pockets without me knowing about it. This is where I'm gonna take a detour from the real scene because I wanted a more backwoods atmosphere, and an asphalt road wouldn't really work for that. It's been more than a year since I've done concrete panels from cork sheets, and my cravings were getting out of hand. Suppose you're wondering why. It's because the technique is too easy and too awesome. You can recreate everything from the subtle texture, crumbling edges, and realistic cracks like it's nothing. When you're using cork, you're playing the diorama game on easy mode. Once these were in place, I could laminate the sides of the base. I like working with double-sided tape because it's super fast, clean and durable, but it creates a small gap between the foam and the veneer. Everything in this diorama is designed to fit perfectly, and because the tape would mess up my measurements, I had to use PVA glue which warps the veneer and takes forever to dry. As such, I've put the wisdom of my mentor underneath the diorama and added hobby zone drawers on top to weigh it down for about 2 hours. This is still one of the most boring aspects of making dioramas, but it's super important for the overall presentation, and I'm slowly finding an efficient workflow that makes it less painful with each project. Next up, I smeared my favorite chocolate mousse, aka VMS Smart Mud. I left the edge of the veneer slightly raised so it would catch the paste and leave everything nice and clean. This magical concoction is a total game changer when it comes to scenic terrain, and you can get it as well directly from VMS or Michigan Toy Soldier if you follow the links in the description, and you'll also get a nice discount with my sale coupons. What's not for sale is the real earth from my garden trademark, and while it adds realistic texture, it also prevents the landy from sticking to the mud paste while I'm pressing it down to make an indentation. I almost forgot to fill and blend the gap between the concrete and the veneer, but this was a quick job with the acrylic putty. Then I could integrate it into the terrain with more real earth trademark, working it into the gaps with an old paintbrush. Although the VMS Ballast Freeze has a very low surface tension, I made my life even easier by soaking the ground with alcohol, and then I applied the glue. It will take a short while to dry, and then the ground will be rock hard, and we won't even have to wait for the morning. I continued with some rudimentary vegetation by stippling undiluted PVA glue onto the dirt and hitting it with short static grass applied with a cheap eBay applicator. This is a quick, bulletproof method that works every time, but if I want denser clumps of grass, I just grab it with tweezers and forcefully push it into the PVA glue. This is what we have so far, and I think it's the best time to move over to my painting workbench and give it our best shot. First of all, I sprayed every component with gray primer. It's very satisfying to see all these different materials receive the same neutral finish, but it also helps us big time because, for example, the acrylic putty is an absorbent material and the primer will seal it off. Now, here are the acrylics used to paint the cement wall. I'm using a small piece of sponge, one for each color, to block in the basic tones. Sponges are the best tool when you want to paint something quickly and also introduce a lot of texture along the way. The thickness and the opacity of the paints have also a huge impact on the final look, and it all comes down to the vision and the look you're trying to achieve. The real wall has a sandy, brownish color, so that's why I went for this color palette. I quickly grabbed a very dark gray enamel wash and flooded the entire surface with it. Some of it will collect in the cracks, although that's not our main objective yet, but it will also tie the different stippled colors together and slightly outline the subtle textures. There's no need to spend too much time on this. Once it was all dry, I covered the wall with a generous coat of chipping fluid applied with a large paintbrush. The same colors were now applied once again in smaller and more random amounts. It might seem like a completely pointless task, but the dark wash underneath creates contrast between this and the base layer. And what's more, once we activate the fluid with tap water and start wearing the paint down, it introduces a completely different texture. This is a simple way of adding lots of depth and variation to an otherwise flat surface of the wall. But we're not done yet. Let's give it another coat of VMS fluid in selected areas. You see, the real wall seems to have some kind of white paint remnant. I felt like this would be much easier to airbrush with Tamiya paint, and while that was true, the chipping was actually much harder. If I used white acrylic applied with a sponge, the resulting paint layer would have been much sloppier and the chipping much heavier. In other words, more in line with the real thing. But hey, after a few minutes and different brushes, I managed to get the look I was after. You can call me a crack enthusiast because I took my time enhancing all this sweet damage with a dark wash. I like how wash is applied over a flat surface bleed into the paint, adding subtle discoloration, stains and fake shadows. The same applies to all these surface details such as the electrical wiring. A nice outline coupled with subtle shading and smooth color transitions. Mwah! The final touch was a subtle outline with a pale color, focused mainly on the upper edges of each crack. AK paints are the real deal, my friends, and I'm so glad to be sponsored by them. And if you like them as well, you can help me out by shopping through the affiliate link in the description. And if you use my sales coupon, achieving this signature HDR look will be much cheaper. Here's another color palette, and as you can tell, we're gonna paint the bricks. Funny enough, the actual base color of the bricks isn't very important in this case, because the real ones look decomposed, covered in dirt and stuff like that. So most of the contrast will be instead created with dusty and black acrylic washes. We can also see some of the remaining foam texture showing through in this shot, a sign that I should have added 3 layers of paint sealant during the construction. But it also led me to realize that I forgot to add the crumbled texture to them. Luckily, this is a very easy task even in this painted stage, using a broken toothpick. But it's apparently not as easy to film with proper focus. There are countless ways and materials to replicate the mortar, many of which I've shown on this channel in the past. But because I'm a stickler for detail, and because I like to torture myself with pointlessly time-consuming jobs, I decided to replicate it with acrylic wood putty applied with a pointy paintbrush. As you can guess, this takes a lot of time and we have to switch back and forth between application and blending. But our sweet reward is a rock-hard finish that accepts enamel washes like a king. This is very important if we want to have a detailed effect with lots of definition and contrast, because once the wash is dry, we can restore the original color and add highlights, which looks much better than any other method, and we can also faithfully replicate the spilled mortar running over the bricks. The final touch was adding moss and weeds, again based on the real building. This super fine moss from AK is amazing because it's basically super short static grass and the texture looks so much better than crushed foam. Of course, I changed the color slightly and also integrated it into the surface with slimy washes from AK for a more natural yet still very punchy look. Let's now paint the shack. This is actually gonna be a pretty simple process because the real thing is just orange. So the base coating stage was pretty straightforward, just some Tamiya Holo Red highlighted with flat yellow. Now we'll drown it in these acrylics diluted with water. My main reason for this approach is that I couldn't push the base coat any further because it was already starting to look yellow, and I needed a strong, vibrant orange with some subtle texture, thus acrylic washes. I also used this moment to add subtle variation between each panel, and if needed, I added several washes on top of each other. A good portion of the shack has visible remnants of zinc plating and even some white paint. The heavy wear meant I could keep the zinc effect extremely simplistic, just a very pale, bluish grey mixed from Tamiya paints and lots of chipping with tap water. I managed to add very subtle texture to the corroded areas, while also keeping the majority of the effect focused at the bottom. There are also two large signs on the real shack, and although I considered them for a while, ultimately I decided against the idea because I'd be recreating and paying for them for this single purpose. The side seems to be painted in an off-white color, so I did that as well. Note how the warm tone contrasts with the bluish zinc effect. There are also two large sprayed circles here, and it's these types of random details on decaying buildings that make me happy as a kid on Christmas. The only other rust effect I did here was heavy speckling with diluted oil paints. They add visual variety to the corroded surfaces, enhance the gritty texture, and also blend the chipped layers of zinc and paint. But there's a downside to that. You see, they can tone it down too much in some cases. Don't you worry, I've got it all covered, but first, let me apply a wash and some fake shadows. Outlining the bolts is an obvious choice. We didn't spend hours with them for nothing after all, but what's questionable is the forced contrast between each panel. I wasn't sure about it, but at the same time, I wanted to have each panel clearly defined. So I'll let you be the judge, but I think it was the right choice in the end. Okay, so the speckling might have toned the chipped layers down a lot, but careful mapping with a paintbrush will not only fix it, but also introduce another layer of visual texture. And what's even funnier, the same effect can be seen in one of the photos of the shack from this very angle. Another questionable call was picking out the bolts with a lighter rusty tone, but then again, would you expect anything else from me? Well, I don't know about you, but I think the shack is the bee's knees. I'm really happy with the outcome, although I've cut some corners because this project was already too extensive without the extra care I'd like to put into the paint job. With all the main elements painted, we can focus on the wood in the morning, and we're gonna make it truly exquisite. To make this technique work, everything needs to have a flat white undercoat. The simplified wooden effect is achieved with oil paints, and this is truly one of the easiest methods ever. You just slap them on the surface and smear them in the direction of the wood grain. The color choice is completely up to you depending on the finish. I, for example, chose grayish and black tones. This is just a base coat that can be adjusted further or act as a good chipping color for heavily worn paint. I'll speedrun you through the process on this window because I want to have this out of the way quickly. And before we get into the real meat of the process, let me just quickly make the glass from acetate foil. This can be a very painful or super easy job depending on how well thought out our window frame construction was. I designed each frame with a flat surface on the backside, so the glass fits without any issues. A quick oil paint wash on top of flat varnish will give them a grimy, old look, and it'll also obscure the black void behind them. Okay, let me try to show you the process more clearly on this door. Once again, I brushed the VMS chipping fluid on the oil paint base coat and followed it up with a thick layer of ochre and sandy tone for some added color variation. When you apply the fluid and paint with a brush, it usually leads to some pretty heavy chipping, but that's precisely what we want on these wooden surfaces. Even the wood grain helps us with the effect. Of course, the amount of wear depends on the desired finish, but the next step is usually a black wash between the planks. Once again, as with all washes, it defines and outlines all the details, but also adds nice subtle hints of weathering and shading. I try to keep it subtle around the wood grain because then it creates a very heavy-handed look. Honestly, there's infinite variety on faded wood, and in this case, there was a giant orange rust-like stain at the bottom, which I replicated with oil paints. The same effect can be applied around the nail holes and hinges. It's no surprise that rust looks especially good on yellow. The final touch is adding light chipping around the edges. This can be done with a variety of colors ranging from off-white, deck tan to light sandy tones. The color depends completely on the overall tone of the wooden surface, but also it's not obligatory, it's more of a stylistic choice. The planks and boards were treated in the same manner, but in some cases I relied completely on dry brushing and washes. In others, I employed the chipping method with black or white color. After all the obligatory black and rust washes were done, I added some quickly painted plastic canisters behind the window. It's a very simplistic detail, but you'll see just enough through the filthy window, and it's not gonna look like a Lovecraftian void anymore. The barn door is an amalgamation of all these techniques combined together, and each major component was treated individually in order to achieve as much contrast and variety as possible. Honestly, barn doors made from plastic are the ultimate playground of various textures and color combinations. Once you employ the chipping fluid, an entire world of possibilities is available to you. If it were any better, it would definitely be illegal. And I'm not just tossing that around, because the urge to squeeze as much potential out of it as possible can sometimes bog you down. I swear, I spent the same amount of time sitting and thinking about how to paint the next plank as I spent actually doing the thing. Plywood is a special category on its own, and painting it brings me a special kind of joy, because if you follow my videos, then you probably remember that Pacific Sherman covered in planks and plywood and how I was afraid to paint that model until I learned how to paint artificial wood in an exquisite way. And now, not even a year later, I'm sitting here having a blast with the individual boards, and my biggest problem is figuring out what cool effect am I going to add on the next one. I mean, the finished door is a small model in itself, and if you ever see me putting these in picture frames, you'll know that I'm doing my best to end this channel. But it wouldn't be a proper piece of exquisite wood without a few enameled signs. After all, I didn't design an entire A4 sheet full of these and didn't get it printed on a professional machine 5 times for nothing. This time I kept the rust effects quite subtle and only used them to knock down the satin sheet on the printed chipping. Although I didn't replicate the original signs from the real building, I made up for it with these two beauties. With the front wall finished, you can imagine the strong urge to put it in a picture frame, but because we have a diorama to finish, it landed where it should. Here you can see that I also painted and added the palette and the altar on the roof, and with the buildings finished, we can quickly paint the groundwork. Here I started with my usual approach, airbrushing the grass as the very first step. I wanted to have some variety here, so I combined a dark yellow base coat with light, sort of faded green. It's gonna work well as a base coat, but we'll get back to it in a moment with paintbrushes. The concrete makes up for a good 3/4 of the entire groundwork, so let's paint this absolute gigachat of a surface appropriately, and by appropriately, I mean with sponges. The color palette is slightly different than the one on the wall. There are more gray tones, but there are also some common ones such as light earth or deck tan. It's a completely different painting approach than the one I used a year ago, and honestly, I think this one is more efficient, while the resulting texture is roughly the same. The majority of the heavy lifting is again gonna be done with enamel washes, and although I prefer to put the black wash into every crack and crevice, some dark brown stains were also added to make the concrete look more dirty. What hasn't changed since last year is the very fine chipping with a pointy paintbrush, but we don't have to go over the entire surface because most of the visual texturing was already done with sponges. Just erase portions, cracks, outlines of the various levels, that kind of stuff. It doesn't take too much time. Once this was done, I could glue the buildings in place because, for the final touches, we need to see how each element plays together. But even more importantly, we have to blend the two veneers together as best as possible. I've put a lot of effort into this aspect, and although the pieces didn't fit together like Lego blocks, the overall fit was still pretty good, and just a small amount of wood putty was needed to hide the gaps. The veneer is made from oak wood, and because I used oak-colored wood filler for the task, once I apply the wood stain, everything will blend together. The staining process required far more accuracy than on my other dioramas, but I simply used smaller pieces of sponge and was able to finish everything in an easy breezy way. I mean, it's not like too many people are gonna stare at the diorama from the other side, but it always makes me proud to see a diorama with exquisitely laminated sides. Now for the fun part and the not so fun part. The latter is what we're doing now. Painting the ground with enamel washes is just... it's always the same ordeal. Luckily, there's not much surface to work on, and it was all done pretty quickly. I wanted a dark earth tone, so it was enough to apply 2 dark earth effects and 1 dark wash in some areas. While the ground was drying, I adjusted the grass tones with dry brushing. Most of the time it's hard to guess how the airbrushed grass is gonna work with its surroundings when it's the first thing we paint. So a little bit of tinkering is perfectly okay, especially when it leads to a much better overall result. While I was at it with the acrylics, I also picked out the stones on the ground with various grayish, sandy and brown colors. As you can tell, this result by itself would be quite subpar for this scene, so let's enhance it further with some natural scatter. This is not an autumn scene by any means, but this homemade natural leaf scatter will greatly enhance the look of this repair in the diorama. Now, one thing I also noticed on street view is how the fresh grass is surrounded by dry, trampled grass that covers most of the ground in a nearby yard. That was the absolutely perfect detail the scene was missing. All of it was glued in place with AK's gravel and sand fixer, which is alcohol based and doesn't leave any traces on non-porous surfaces. It takes a while to fully evaporate, but once it did, I post-shaded the leaf scatter with a light rusty tone, mainly because the leaves I used were dark and ugly. I need to grind some yellow and orange ones this year. The trampled grass was then dry brushed, and some of this effect also landed on the leaves, enhancing their visual detail and blending them further with the surrounding groundwork. All things considered, it was a quick job, but the enhancement factor went through the roof. I enhanced the vegetation even further with some laser cut and photo etched dandelions and nettles. These were kindly gifted to me by Mr. Model Scene himself at a model show, and even though I already bought them with my own money in the past, it still made me very happy, so here I'm putting them to good use. I also decided to change up my routine here, and instead of base coating them with a dark brown color and building up the green tones with acrylics, I simply flooded them with several enamel green washes from AK for a more vibrant and dramatic look. These were also applied to some of the artificial elements in the diorama to blend them further with the scenery. It was a huge revelation to me to observe how well these mossy tones work with rusty surfaces. And now it's time for every modeler's greatest fear: a woman. Not gonna lie, I was a bit nervous because I can get away with over-the-top contrasts, dramatic looks and whatnot on grizzled military men from World War II, but feminine features are much smoother, and I simply have no experience with that. But after my obligatory black and white pre-shading and glazing, I sort of got into the groove of painting like usual. Blue is one of my favorite colors on figures, so I had lots of fun with the jumpsuit, but I tried to keep the shading more subtle on the rest of the figure. I used more pinkish tones on her skin compared to my usual yellowish colors, and I kept the deep shadows at bay for a more natural, smoother look. Well, in the end, it's not my best figure, but just like with most of my painting misadventures, I think it's good enough to a point where it doesn't drag the overall vibe of the scene down. Doesn't raise the bar either, just fits right in the middle, and I'm totally okay with that. So with Landy and the Yorkshire Lass glued in place, my mission was over. My friends, what started as another small civilian subject quickly turned into the biggest small diorama I've ever done. I knew that I was going to build this scene for the Land Rover since the beginning, but I didn't expect how much work I would put into it, especially the buildings. The overall workload on this small scene is right up there with the biggest dioramas, even the watermill scene from the last year. Sure, I could have finished it in half time, but when you're having too much fun with all the details on the buildings, you just naturally put more time and effort into your work. As I was finishing the garage door, I took a break and went to look at the other buildings I've done over the last 3 years, and I gotta say, it was nice to see some progress there. What started as an accessory to my dioramas has turned into a newfound passion for me, and I'm genuinely having a blast with each and every miniature building, be it a facade that ends up in a picture frame, or a three-dimensional structure like these. And if you told me in the past that painting wood can be a really fun and creative process, I probably wouldn't believe you, but look at where we are now. Sure, some of the colorful combinations are totally over the top, but what can you do when it's so much fun? The next subject will be again from World War II, but before we get there, I want to sincerely thank every single one of you for watching these videos, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here building models for a living, and I can't thank you enough for this amazing opportunity. All of this is also possible thanks to my incredible patrons. My whole Patreon page is like a night shift magazine subscription, as I post there pretty often, and you'll get updates from my workbench where I share my thoughts and insights. We can get in touch through DMs, comments and emails. I'm posting 1 week early ad-free videos, and these stay there forever so you can always get back to them. I also have some small extra goodies such as 3D models which you can use for detailing your projects, a bunch of real-life references for nature, old buildings and so on. And last but not least, these high-resolution studio photos which show the diorama in more detail than video ever could. It'll help me a lot, but no pressure. Anyway, the next model is the last project I added to my bucket list for this year, and I'm gonna do something fresh with it. And once it's done, I'll try something completely different, or I'll just make another facade, because why not? So until the next video, stay safe, be nice to one another, take care of each other, build your models, don't just collect them, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!
No jasne. Friends. Sometimes and just the fact that this diorama is so when się auto prejde. Friends. Sometimes a diorama can be Now obviously I'm not at the real spot. This is the best I could find in my area. But if already one person knew... Now obviously I'm not at the real spot. This is the best I could find in my area. But if already one person knows where that place is... Čo som ti chcel povedať?